morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us from. This is the fourth session of the JWF Media and Journalism webinar. And for Sanna and Aliza, very quick Snapchat of what we have been doing here. So in the room, we're filled with young journalists, media members from 29 different countries. It's been going great. This is an online certificate program. We are in our fourth year organizing this wonderful gathering. And the most important, I think, feature of this certificate program is that even though all the topics are predominantly working around media freedom and press issues, journalists' rights, we do have civil society members in the room as well who are looking forward to promote for the rights of media members, journalists, and trying to get learn from the expertise of our speakers on how better they can disseminate whichever working area in human rights or sustainable development that they're particularly focusing on. So we have a great community here. Colleagues, once again, welcome on board. Please, just like we do, when we start our discussion, start typing in your comments, feedbacks. That is helping us a lot for the Q&A session. So today, we will hear shortly from Aliza Appelbaum, who is the Vice President of Programs of International Center for Journalists, overseeing its programs in Latin America with a focus on investigative reporting, including others in Sri Lanka and Sub-Saharan Africa as well. She indeed started her career as a journalist in Egypt and US too. We will hear from her career journey too. So prior to her role in this institution, he worked at International Research and Exchange Board on media and civil society development programs in Central America, Eurasia, and the Middle East region. We also have Sanna Camara on board, joining us today from Gambia. He's a journalist with over 2 decades of experience in reporting, and he was the chairman of the National Journalism Awards 2022. And Camara was among the other hundreds of journalists who had to leave his homeland due to the dictatorship in the Gambia, but very glad to hear and see that he is back to his beloved homeland, Gambia, and we will hear from his journey as well shortly. So in these webinars, we have spoke on the role of media in promoting human rights, fundamental political, civil human rights for all, the role of storytelling and the impact of human rights documentary for these working areas. And last Tuesday, we had 2 wonderful journalists who shared their expertise from reporting on conflict and doing journalism in war zones. So today, we will particularly focus on forms of violence against journalists, and we will hear from Aliza in terms of what forms of resources or training programs does International Center for Journalists provide to its members. So very briefly, I would love to set the stage for today's discussion, as many media organizations and press freedom reporters as well from various intergovernmental agencies are indicating that violence against journalists hit a new record, particularly this past year and 2023. And following these entities reporting cycles very closely, we do see a positive correlation between the rise of authoritarianism across the globe and shrinking space of journalists, media members. Rule of law, particularly in this decade, being under the control and, so to say, manipulation of state authorities. As human rights defenders, we also observe that legal barriers, legal challenges are indeed new sort of, say, battle zone for journalists, as arbitrary detentions, imprisonments are at its peak as well. Women journalists particularly are on the front line, encountering gender-related crimes, violations, and I missed on this, but I will definitely ask my colleague Priyanka to share these resources. But just yesterday, Article 19 has released its new global expression report and noted that people now experience limits on their democratic rights at levels that are not seen since 1986. So we're talking about decades of setbacks in our rights to express our opinion freely, and journalism is here at stake that we're speaking about. And I will wrap up my remarks here, but a very important takeaway in the last year, this report says 360 million people across the world from 12 countries particularly expressed declines in their press freedom of expression. So building upon these highlights, these statistics, let's start with Aliza. That would be great if you could start by introducing more of your career background, journalism background with us, and please do inform our young audience, young journalists, media professionals in the room about the mission of the International Center for Journalists. Particularly, I'm amazed at the Pamela Howard Forum on Global Crisis Reporting and the form of resources that you're providing to all investigative journalists across the globe. So Aliza, over to you.
Thank you. What a great introduction. So nice to meet all of you. Looking forward to hearing your questions and comments as well. So yes, my name is Aliza Appelbaum. I'm the Vice President of Programs at ICFJ, the International Center for Journalists. I did start my career as a journalist. I studied journalism in university at Northwestern, and then I worked quite a bit for newspapers in Chicago, Miami, and in New York and New Jersey. I also spent about a year and a half in Egypt. I think I saw someone else here on this chat is from Egypt. So marhaba, would be lovely to hear from you as well. So basically, as a journalist, I covered mostly local politics. And as you can imagine, covering local politics for a newspaper was, that's always been a very specific kind of career choice within the journalism world. Ultimately, I decided to go back to graduate school for a master's in international relations, and I've been working in media development NGOs ever since. So I do think, ICFJ, for me, it's been great because there are many things that I miss about being a journalist. So it's been a great way to combine this love that I still have for journalism with the interest that I have in working internationally and supporting journalists around the world, especially young journalists. So it seems like a really great opportunity for me. So at ICFJ, we support a network of journalists around the world. We currently run more than 80 programs every year, and we're in more than 180 different countries. We also support not just journalists, but journalism entrepreneurs. So a lot of people in our network have ideas for maybe a startup or a certain kind of journalism service that would be helpful in their country. And we do help them with opportunities for funding when we can. We have different kinds of programs that support different aspects of media. So we have a lot of programming on disinformation, as I'm sure you can imagine. We support journalists in exile, and we also support media sustainability efforts. So how to keep your newsroom or your media outlet sustainable. We work with newsrooms that are one person, and we work with newsrooms that are hundreds of people. So there's something for everyone, I think. And I'll share some links in the chat when I'm done talking. We have a newsletter. Well, we have a publication, an in-house publication that maybe some of you have heard of called IJNet, the International Journalists Network. It's a publication by journalists for journalists. We publish in 8 languages, including English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Arabic, Chinese, Farsi, and a couple of others. And it's original content in the different, we translate, but it's also original content in each of the languages. And through IJNet, we reach our IJNet newsletter has an audience of more than 100,000 people, mostly journalists and media workers, where we share opportunities for things like fellowships, trainings, small grants to fund your work, things like that. And then as we've discussed, a lot of my background is in investigative journalism. So I run a lot of our investigative journalism programs, and we do have additional resources for investigative reporters, including focusing on security, digital security, physical security, and psychosocial security. And then finally, I will close by mentioning the Pamela Howard Forum on Global Crisis Reporting. It's a series of closed Facebook groups. We're currently in 5 languages, including English, Spanish, French, Arabic, and I want to say Portuguese, and hopefully more coming soon. And basically, you can request to join any of these Facebook groups. And basically, it's a resource for journalists to come together. It started during the pandemic as a way for journalists covering the pandemic to share resources, but now it's kind of evolved to basically be any other kind of crisis reporting. So if you're going out to cover, for example, protests in your neighborhood and you want to know how to keep yourself safe, then the forum is a great place to turn. If you're looking for a certain resource, let's say that you're covering public health and you're looking for a certain resource with a certain kind of scientific or medical background, the forum is a great place to turn. And each language forum is run by a community manager. The English language one is run by Paul Adepoju, who is Nigerian. And I'll share the link for the English one in the chat. And if you'd like to see another language, just message me and I'll find that link for you as well. So thank you again for having me and looking forward to an interesting discussion.
Thank you so much, Aliza. And this was a wonderful introduction to ICJ as well. I've been following your incredible work since a while for now, and seeing all these training sets, programs, professional development initiatives that ICJ is leading is wonderful. And I'm extremely glad to have you here today to share all these resourceful tools that you're leading your organization with. And I'm additionally glad that you mentioned your supporting mechanism for journalists in exile too, because we do have people in the room who are reporting from exile as dissident journalists with critical views of what's going on in their homeland countries. And we will have more questions in this particular issue of state-led crimes against journalists and media members as well. One more comment I had, and I didn't know about your services on journalism entrepreneurs, and I think we will have more questions on that coming on in the discussion part 2. So thank you so much for your initial remarks, and I'll now turn to Mehmet and Sanna.
Thank you, Cemre. And also I would like to welcome one more time Sanna Camara, a journalist from the Gambia, which I had the pleasure of visiting in 2014 as a guest of the former Vice President Isato Nije Saidi at the time to initiate peace education program for the young people. And Sanna, we are really, happy to have you with us, and we would like to learn more about your journalism career, how you started journalism, and also, of course, you have at least 2 decades of experience in covering most of the pressing issues of press freedom in the Gambia, and you have been an exiled journalist in Senegal, as you said earlier, and then later on. You came back to the Gambia and you served as the media officer and the senior communication officer at the Republic of Gambia. And we would like you to, please just, talk to us about your journalism career and how do you analyze the declining freedom of expression on the global scale and also the Gambia as well.
Yeah, good. So thank you very much for having me. I started journalism in the Gambia in 2001. At the time, there was no school of journalism in the Gambia. And the first school of journalism we had came in 2010. So, and we are the first to enroll in to have a professional training. So, which means we learn on the job. You go to a newsroom, you get enrolled, and then before you started or you assigned to go out on coverage, you spend at least some months on the job. You train on the basics of news gathering. You attach to experienced journalists and reporters. So you learn before you sent out in the field, at least you have a basic understanding of news, what needs to be done when you cover the news, and you're working directly under supervision until to a point that they feel you're okay to work independently. Then this is how we started journalism here. And I think it has been that way for a long time in the Gambia, because we had a first newspaper in the Gambia in 1896. That's a long history. I don't want to bore you with that. But then fast forward to my time, during my time in the Gambia, because 2001, we had a military kind of dictatorship. They were military, but later they became civilian. So the style of ruling never changed. I was arrested on 3 occasions under the former dictatorship. All of them are related to issues of human rights, reporting on human rights and investigating and exposing crimes that were being perpetrated by the former regime against the people in the Gambia. So the first one was instances of arrest of some military officers who were allegedly planning a coup against the former president. I think he had almost 20-something coup attempts that were foiled. So mostly a lot of people think that it's a way to suppress his opposition or people he supposed as enemies within the army. So this was my first experience. I was detained among a lot of several others. Our offices at the time, we were the most critical newspaper called The Independent. The offices were closed, but prior to the close, I think we were firebombed twice on 2 occasions. We get death threats. Our offices get visited by soldiers with pistols and then threatening us for writing against their leader. You know, so a good number of our staff actually fled the country before even 2006. Some of us who had been here until 2006, when they closed down the paper and they barricaded the offices, we had to stay and then continue our work. But it was tough because all the other newspapers media houses were trying to stay away from you because they think that you are like you attract trouble. So it was difficult to find your feet here in the Gambia at the time. But nonetheless, people like me, because of the passion we have for the job, we never relented. We continued working as freelance journalists. We couldn't get full-time jobs, but I stayed on. And 2008, 2009, we started another newspaper that is called the Daily News. I was the editor there. I was the editor-in-chief. So with that one, we had just a moment, please. Sorry, just hold on. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, this is something I have to say. So in 2009, we started the paper. I was at editor-in-chief, and I wanted to follow in the footsteps of how I have been doing with the former paper called The Independent. Exposing some excesses that were being carried out by the military against the people here, and then also reporting critically about issues of human rights, about democracy, freedom of expression. These were real issues of concern at the time. If you look at Gambia's human rights record in those days, we were one of the worst in Africa. I think Reporters Without Borders used to rank us as one of the worst countries for press freedom in Africa. And they used to describe Yahya Jammeh as a press freedom predator of press freedom. So we had one of very difficult environment to operate from. Again, in 2010, I got my second experience of getting arrested, but this time by the military, because we were reporting some brutalities that they've been meting out to certain youths within the tourism sector. And this was another quite an experience for me, and it was quite threatening, but I never left the country. I choose to stay to continue doing my work. Obviously, after a certain a day or so under detention, I was released again, continued doing my work. And then in 2014 is when I had my third experience, but then working with another paper. By the way, the second paper got also closed down in 2012 because the president backed on a mass execution of death row prisoners without any due process. So this paper was one of the papers that were critically reporting on this, exposing this to the world, and they were closed down as a result. So eventually I had to go and do a second diploma. Well, that was my first diploma, by the way, in 2010. I was already studying my professional program in the Gambia. So that diploma, while I was on that diploma, I had to leave the job because I wanted to focus on my professional development. So when it happened that in 2014, I was already working with another paper called The Standard. The Standard newspaper started around 2012, but within 6 months of operation, it was also closed down. And when it got closed down, they had to. It took about 9 months before they were reopened again. So in reopening, the publisher was looking for some journalists with good experience to help restart the paper. I got recruited to work with them, and that was how we started the Standard newspaper. And then I think I have this tradition of being critical in my reporting. So 2014, I was reporting on trafficking in persons in the Gambia. There have been a good number of Gambian young girls and young women who were trafficked to the Middle East to work there as housemaids. And it's an experience that was exposing them to a lot of harsh labor conditions, exploitation, like more of a modern day slavery. And then in my investigation of this trade, I realized that certain people very close to the president were also helping, or were the ones who were also helping to recruit these girls to go to the Middle East, because the businesses that were trafficking these girls actually were legally registered businesses in the Gambia, and they had the support of the government. They recruit these girls with the promise of providing them jobs, decent jobs and good incomes in the Middle East countries. When these girls go there, they get exploited, they get all kinds of experiences. So the government wasn't happy with my this reporting, because when I reported on it was on the front page of the newspaper, and it was picked up by the BBC, and then before you know, I was arrested by the police again. This time it was the Major Crimes Unit. They were trying to investigate me for the stories. They wanted to know who were my sources. They thought that I was being used to sabotage the leader, and I got detained 48 hours in police cell. And when I got released, it took about 8 weeks. I had to be, reporting on bail. And then it was also during that time that the government came up with several other statements. So my lawyers thought this was really very high risk situation for me, and that if I continue to live in the Gambia, my life could have been exposed. And by the way, during this time, between 2001 when I started until I left 2014, we had lost 2 journalists. One was assassinated by members who were later established as members of the military. The other one who got arrested at the offices of the Daily Observer. And until today, we have not been able to establish. So he just enforced the disappearance of that journalist. So you have over 100 who were arrested and detained here, who were harassed, and a lot of us had to go into exile. But thank God, when I left the Gambia, I was in exile. I continued reporting and exposing the Gambia. When I was invited at conferences, I speak up to let the world know what was happening. And part of this experience was to go to the United Nations headquarters in Addis Ababa, and also travel to other sub-regional summits in ECOWAS in Abuja. I also went to The Hague at the ICC, because I think one of the issues that we faced, that the president, when he knew that his cases would have warranted a war crime, he wanted to pull the country out of the ICC. And I was invited at The Hague to go and then also cover the event, the Assembly of State Parties, but also an opportunity to also talk about the Gambia and our experiences. So when we had democratic change of government in 2017, I was very happy to come home and continue my work. So thank God now I live in the Gambia, I work here. It's a free country. The space has totally changed. There is a very good improvement, and in terms of our ranking by Reporters Without Borders, by the Freedom House and all the other major press freedom and other freedom monitoring organizations. It's a totally different country now. So I'm happy to be here, Gambia, even though we had some challenges, we're having some challenges, but it's nothing comparable to what we had under the dictatorship. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanna, for sharing all these experiences with us. We have been discussing about press freedom and violations against journalists in different parts of the world. Unfortunately, journalism are going through different threats, life-threatening issues, sometimes detention, arrests, or assaults, or sometimes assassinations, unfortunately. And but of course, on the other hand, this is something about being an advocate for press freedom and the rule of law and democracy. The journalists are contributing immensely to make sure that our freedoms are protected and promoted. So thank you so much for sharing all of these experiences with us. Now I'm giving it back to Cemre. for the follow-up questions.
Thank you so much, and special thanks to Sanna for sharing his background, some of the challenges, arbitrary detentions that he had been combating with. But I'm very happy that he is now back to Gambia. Okay, so moving on, as I did my introductory remarks on the rise of authoritarian regimes, trends, and the positive correlation between these two norms, press freedom and oppressive autocrats, shrinking the space of media members. And one of the problems that we have in this particular issue is that there is no globally agreed definition of terrorism. This is a particular region where states are manipulating the human rights law, and there's no particular convention binding member states around the supposedly standards of what we must seek in the definition of terrorism. And this is underlined by many of the reports as well. And my expertise is to focus on monitoring and reporting on civil and political rights in Turkey, the number 4 highest countries with the most number of journalists behind the bars. And when I go back to study the statistics of Turkey, I see that over 85% of the journalists are behind the bars with the accusation of terrorism. And these are groundless laws with very ambiguous human rights terminology used in there. And we see that we do report that news articles, tweets are allegedly groundlessly used as legal accusations to prosecute journalists, media members. So I would like to turn to Aliza, as she's monitoring and reporting on different regions and leading ICJ's programs. Sanna, like from his own journey, shared a couple examples, but I would love to have your insights as well on what forms of increase you see in your reporting, what forms of censorship, state-led violence, threatening both physical and mental well-being of journalists, and maybe some of the forms of state-led violences that dissident journalists are encountering. So I would love to speak more on this, as Council of Europe is very much reporting on this too. With the rise of transnational crimes, media members are sometimes not even safe in their resettlements outside of their home country. So over to you for your regional insights on this particular working area.
Thank you, Cemre. So first, I'll start by asking the group a question. Who here has received any kind of digital security training? You can just put an emoji as a response, or raise your hand, or put it in the chat, whichever way you want to respond. But has anybody here received any kind of digital security training? No.
Just to see the screen, I put it in the gallery view, but we have a downward finger.
I see a down.
Yeah.
No. Okay. And what about physical security? Has anyone in your newsroom, or has anyone ever talked to you about physical security?
I saw Tahrim with a thumbs up.
1. Okay, a one-day workshop. Okay, so I guess one thing that I want to talk about is a lot of people in media development, or in media these days, there is a lot of talk about protecting yourself and protecting your sources. And when we say yourself, we also mean, your family, your friends, your loved ones. When you're out reporting on a topic, a lot of time, one tactic that we're seeing is that people will get threats, not just against themselves, but against their family. If you are a person who is reporting from exile, you can't report in your own country anymore. But if you've left other people behind, if you still have family in that country, sometimes you'll get threats against your family. I saw someone in the chat saying fake news and disinformation laws. Yes, this is absolutely something that we're seeing is on the rise. What happens is that a government will say that they have criminalized fake news, And then what that means is that anybody who publishes something that they don't agree with, they just say it's fake news, and then they can arrest that person. So that is definitely a growing issue. We've seen it with Russia, and we've seen it across the Middle East, and we have definitely seen it in Latin America and Central America, especially. It's a tactic that that dictators like Ortega in Nicaragua have very clearly taken from the Russian playbook. So that's definitely something to be aware of. Another issue that we've seen a lot is online harassment, especially of women journalists or people in the LGBTQ plus community, or really any other kind of marginalized group. We see it in Latin America with indigenous communities as well. And basically what happens is that if you put yourself out there, then it's not just that people will be targeting you for online harassment, but also bots. And, you can have a dedicated smear campaign online where you're targeted and made to feel very uncomfortable. Your address can be posted and you would never know who did it. And it can be coordinated through multiple, kind of silent agents. So there is definitely a lot to be concerned about. What I would recommend is that anybody who is working as a journalist these days should take some basic steps to prepare themselves. I would recommend a basic digital security course for anyone. Get strong passwords, use secure communications, pay a little extra for a secure email like Proton Mail, use a VPN if you have to. And I would also say to keep in mind the third kind of security, in addition to digital and physical, we call it psychosocial security. But essentially what that means is that if you're a journalist and you're covering difficult topics all the time, if you're covering crime, if you're covering assault, if you're covering war or genocide, or attacks against yourself, it does take a psychological toll. And I think that's something that as journalists, we all need to talk about more is basically mental health. Are you taking care of yourself? And also, are you treating others with respect? If you interview victims, are you making sure not to re-traumatize them? And also, if you're doing the reporting, are you making sure to not re-traumatize yourself? I see a question in the chat about digital security classes. ICFJ does offer some. If you sign up for the IJNet newsletter that I mentioned, that I posted earlier, you'll get notified when there are opportunities. Some of them are dependent on your region. But in addition to ICFJ, there are many other there's many other resources. They'll most likely be online for digital security. You might be able to find some in person in your country as well. And I can recommend some resources there. But I think the main point that I would want to make here, so as not to take up too much time, is just that yes, unfortunately, harassment of journalists is on the rise. It can take many forms: physical, digital, mental health. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Make sure that you're protecting your family and your sources. It might seem like a lot of work to go and change all your passwords or get a password manager, but I promise you that it's worth the effort to have this kind of training and to really understand the situation.
Thank you so much, Aliza. And we will definitely, I guess, receive more questions from our participants. And I see that a couple people are already writing in the chat that they have attended a couple gatherings, seminars, training sessions. Let's get it out there and maybe share a couple takeaways from these gatherings in the Q&A. I would very much appreciate your active involvement on that end too. And some of the things that you said were extremely important, and I guess we underestimate the systemic attacks that we do receive from online venues, and this is very, very important. I mean, the technological improvements are surely in authoritarian states opening us new channels to do human rights advocacy, but it comes with its challenges as well. Reaching out to individuals is much easier. Exposing them with loads of harassment is way easier, as people are sort of moving smart in their ways to disguise their IDs and everything. But I recently attended UNESCO's press freedom event at United Nations, and we had Rana Ayub, an Indian, very well known, credible journalist from India, and she was sharing the story of one of her very dear friends who underestimated very, very much consistently built online harassment, and at the end of the day, she was actually killed because she never took necessary steps to get these threats to the attention of judiciary or local enforcement mechanisms and everything. So yes, it's very much important that we never underestimate any forms of online harassment that any of us in the room may combat in digital platforms. Turning to Sanna, you very well reflected on your experience on some of the state-led forms of violations that you encountered in your homeland, Gambia. But maybe I can twist this question a little bit further for you to address. So how was this transition period built in Gambia that improved the conditions of reporting journalism in Gambia? Any takeaways or highlights of political or policy implementations that you would love to share from Gambia as best practices?
Thank you. What happened was when there was change of government in 2017, the new government, it was a transition government, so there were very specific reform agendas, the media reform agenda, electoral reform, the judiciary reform, civil society reform, security sector reform. So all those reforms, most of them were undertaken by the state, but in the case of the media, it was civil society led. We had Article 19 office in West Africa and in the Gambia, working with also the Association of NGOs and some other NGOs that are on the ground here. They're working with the Gambia Press Union to initiate, there was a study done into media laws, because we have a lot of draconian media laws that we are deliberately put in our law books to target journalists for imprisonment, for harassment, and also to close down media houses. So a comprehensive study was done, and that work was published, and then it was presented to the state. And then the state also, in goodwill at the time, they took keen interest in reviewing some of these laws. However, in 2015, before the change of government in 2017, the group of journalists supported by FAJ, which is the Federation of African Journalists, took a case to the ECOWAS court. ECOWAS is the Economic Community of the West African States. There's a community court there. Okay, so I was among those journalists. I was a witness, but the plaintiffs were about 4 other journalists who suffered physical torture while they were under detention. Some of them were women journalists who were sexually exploited or sexually abused while they were under detention of the state. Some were male journalists, but they also underwent very harsh physical tortures. And then they needed some other journalists who could validate the experience of these plaintiffs, and I was a star witness in this case. So we went to ECOWAS court with the support of the Federation of African Journalists to use these cases as basis for challenging those laws in the Gambia as draconian. So that the case was ongoing from 2015 to 2016. So by 2017 March, a decision was delivered at the ECOWAS court that all those laws that were challenged were found to be against the constitution of the Gambia and also against the ECOWAS protocol on good governance and human rights and blah, blah, blah. So this was quite helpful as basis for the reform in the Gambia. However, by the time we were filing the case in 2015 at the ECOWAS court, the press union that was also on the ground in the Gambia had also filed a similar case at the Gambia at the Gambia Supreme Court. The problem with the judiciary at the time, Jammeh had this style where he leaves the Gambian lawyers and judges. He goes to the neighboring countries, like Anglophone-speaking countries in Freetown or Cameroon or in Nigeria. And then he hires judges there and brings these judges to go and preside over cases, political cases in the Gambia. So most of the time, we used to call these judges as mercenary judges. These judges were very, very instrumental in sending a lot of journalists to prison, in closing down. They kind of validate the state action against the journalists, So that's why when the new government came in, one of the first things they do was to revoke the contract of all these judges to go back. And then a lot of the judges who were working in the Gambian judiciary and were fired by Jammeh were reinstated, and we had the Gambian judiciary, like they call it, the Gambianization of the judiciary. So we had very good, because Gambia had a lot of eminent judges who were serving in the international court system, including the ICC. We had Appelbaum, who was the prosecutor. We had the international court in Tanzania, the case of Rwanda. All of these cases had Gambian judges and prosecutors who are working there. So there was very good experience from other countries that they could have brought home. So the GPU case that started in 2015 was in the Supreme Court, so that at the time that the change came and there are new judges appointed in the various levels of the court, which is the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and then the Supreme Court. The case that was had by the new panel of judges at the Supreme Court also found a lot of these cases, a lot of these laws to be against the Gambian constitution. So the state had actually no choice but to comply with this ruling. And besides, it has to show that goodwill, because the international community was on the side of the Gambia to for changing a dictatorship through the ballot. So we had a lot of goodwill from the international community working with the new transition government, you know, and then so it was easy for the state to prepare a file, that a case that they took to the Supreme Court and said, you know, we recognize the decision, so we're going to expunge all these laws from the law books. That's number one. Number two, the Supreme Court ruling in the Gambia also held under two clauses that they were holding on. One of them was the case of sedition. Sedition laws came in the Gambia in 1948. Then we had a colonial government, and it was more like the sedition laws we have in England. It was meant initially to protect the reputation of the king or the queen at the time, and then other members of the Kalagi or of the ruling elites. So when Jammeh came in 1996. He actually strengthened this law and then make it even more stringent, and so it was applicable even during the time of Yahya Jammeh. So the Supreme Court believed that this law needs to be there so that it can protect the ruling class. Obviously, we think that the president, the vice president. So if I go out right now and then I speak against the president in certain terms, I could be charged with sedition and I can go to court. Obviously, from 2017 to date, no journalists have been prosecuted on these laws, but those laws, they are still existing there. We also had another case on false publication. False publication was also an instrument that Jammeh was using against journalists who are critically reporting about the government. The problem with this law is that everybody agreed that false news is not ethical. Journalists cannot engage in false news or false publication or false information. However, in the case of the Gambia, it was not properly defined what constitutes false news or false publication. So it was left to the judge or to the magistrate to define or to decide what you have written or what you have published about the government, whether it's false news or it's fake news. I'll give you a specific example. In 2006, when our newspaper was being closed, one of our reporters, the one who was actually authoring the enforced disappearance of certain soldiers, he made an error. This was not deliberate, because there was they had a list of soldiers who were arrested as a result of the coup, because their family members could not establish where this list, these people were. So it was because of our papers investigation, we established a list of about 26. And then in that list, there was a Corporal Sambaba, who was a military officer, and he also disappeared. But in our story, there was another Sambaba who was a former Minister of Interior. So this list, instead of using Sambaba as a corporal in the military, I think the reporter had the name Sambaba that was confused with the former minister. So that kind of unintentional error was used to send this guy to prison for 6 months, or else the GPU, which was the Gambia Press Union at the time, had to pay about 50,000 Gambian dollars. That was at the time was close to almost $2,000. You know, for the average Gambian journalist, that was an amount that you couldn't have afforded at the time. So it was the press union that had to come to the help of this journalist to pay in the money before he was taken to prison. Otherwise, he would have spent 6 months in prison for that kind of unintentional errors. So those are two of the laws that were still withheld or that are still in the Gambian law books. But also, obviously, there are still other laws that are still there. For example, the law on licensing radio stations, the law they have on internet, they call it Information and Communications Act. It was amended in 2013. And it gives very broad powers to the state to confiscate work of the journalist, or to search, or to even go into your email, for example, or your electronic communication, and then do surveillance, that kind of thing, against journalists or any citizen. You understand? this they said was necessary to protect the safety and security of the public, or that kind of, that kind of definition. So some of those laws have not changed. And also there is a law there is, I think it is also amended under the criminal code, so there are still some of the laws that are there, but majority of the laws, 75% of the laws have already been expunged from the law books. Now, what's happening in the Gambia now? The environment is completely, I would not say completely free, but it's very, very free compared to before. Now, our concerns right now is more about how the state uses it, because they are more political, because the former government, when they left, it had some of the officers who remained behind have become members of the new, because the president, the transition of the Gambia, along the way, the president who came as a coalition candidate and he had no party, now has to establish his own party and had to run for a second term. And then so, because he had no party, he had to hire members of the former regime to work with him. So those are the same people who are right now advising the president on some of these things. So, and then we have seen instances where, for example, 3 radio stations were closed down in 2019 because the coalition government agreed that they were going to stay for 3 years and do the reforms and then they will leave, but they never did. So when there was a mass protest against them, the security forces came very harsh against the protesters. So these radio stations were running live commentaries and reporting on these things. So they were arrested or they were closed down without any legal order. And the disguise that, or on the grounds that they were the ones who were helping to incite trouble. So we still have some of those concerns, but basically the reform process is still ongoing and it's not exclusive. One of the good achievements, I have to say it before I wrap up, is that we have access to information law in the Gambia now. Example is in our law books, but it is yet to be implemented in terms of, because it's supposed to, like, after the law has been passed by Parliament, this law is also as a result of the studies that were done by the CSOs against the laws. And then there was a private bill that was sponsored by the civil society groups through the Parliament, and Parliament debated and passed the law. So the president had to sign this law reluctantly because there was a lot of pressure on them to say, you must do this. It has to conform with international standards here and there. So they agreed. And then, but what happened was they didn't provide institutional mechanisms that were necessary to implement this freedom of information law. So right now, for example, after the last election, former Minister of Information, who was a journalist also, he was the president of the press union in 2001 to 2004. He wrote to the electoral body to ask them for the list of electoral roll call. And then the electoral body said, no, they are not in position to share this with anybody, not even like journalists also. So, and then the Minister of Justice in one of the interviews also made a specific declaration that any government officer who was found leaking information to the media was going to be prosecuted. So this was threat to whistleblowers who could even help in fight against corruption. So we are still undergoing the reform process, but it's not 100% realized. And I think it is going to take a lot of work for us to get to where we are. And our fears are the kind of powers that still exist within the law books can turn any leader into become a dictator against us again. So, and as much as we want to enjoy the freedom we have, we believe that as long as those laws are there, we are 100% yet to enjoy our freedom. So this is where I'll stop for now.
Thank you, Sanna, for all these concrete, to the point country case examples. And listening to your remarks, I can easily say that similar pathways of arbitrary state actions in authoritarian regimes are taking place to shrink the civil society space, as well as journalists' safe zone to do their credible reporting too. But you said the rule of law and independency of judiciary away from political pressure have been the fundamental pillars of this recovery progress I see from the example of Gambia. Thank you so much on that. And I'll turn to Mehmet for his last question, and would really appreciate your condensed responses, so we have time to move on to the Q&A discussion as well. So over to you, Mehmet.
Thank you, Jimre. The next question will be about technology, the new digital tools, and also we are living in the age of artificial intelligence. And then at this age, of course, the digital surveillance, cyberbullying, and legal barriers are on the rise as a defamation strategy against journalists. And particularly the media members with critical views are facing threats by state-led crimes and violations by the state, mostly in authoritarian regimes. And of course, like this has become like a systemic attacks on journalism and journalists. In that sense, Aliza, you talked about, some of the, toolkits that the ICFJ has provided, and that was great. But also, I would like you to, talk more about a new development that happened in the US, not only in undemocratic countries, but sometimes social media has been limited by, states, in democratic countries. You might have read, 2 days ago, a federal judge in Louisiana ruled Tuesday that Biden administration likely violated the First Amendment by censoring unfavorable views on social media over the course of the coronavirus pandemic. So sometimes, we definitely know that, authoritarian regimes, they limit the access to social media, or they use all the like surveillance and censorship from press freedom, but that happens in the US, in democratic countries as well. So I would like you to, reflect on policing on social media and press freedom and other fundamental freedoms. And also, Sanna, I would really appreciate if you can talk about how the Gambian Press Union is providing assistance to journalists in terms of violations against for press freedom, and also you are in solidarity with other journalists across the globe, and recently you supported the Turkish journalists who were protesting press freedom in Turkey, and they were protesting in front of the European Court of Human Rights. So I would like to hear your reflections on these. Aliza.
Thank you, Mehmet. These are some really great points and a very interesting discussion. So you are absolutely correct that these things happen in democracies as well. And I think a really great way to look at this is through the lens of election coverage. But I mean, elections more broadly, but then as journalists, as a group of journalists here, how do we cover elections? And of course, there are elections happening all over the world every year. I'm not just talking about the US elections, but recently, if you look at the way that elections have played out in Kenya, in Brazil, in Guatemala, in the US, all of these places, disinformation played a huge role in the election coverage cycle. And then also on top of that, it was a way to kind of confuse the results. In all cases, the candidates were able to go and say, the results aren't real, the results aren't what you think they are. There has been foreign interference in the election. And you know what? In many cases, they're right. There is foreign interference in most elections these days. In the US, I'll say we are both on the receiving and distributing end, I'm sure, of influence in elections. But as journalists, one of the things that's important is to kind of not get lost in all of the noise, not have your coverage of the election get lost in all of the noise and all of the fighting over disinformation and the democratic and not kind of like ruin the reputation of the democratic process. But it is definitely something that I think if you look at how quickly AI has progressed, is going to continue to play a role. So look at deep fake videos, for example. A few years ago, it was kind of like a joke that some comedians could make a video where they made it look like Obama was saying something that he wasn't saying. But deep fakes have now progressed to an astonishing degree. They are very sophisticated looking. And we have to imagine that they're going to continue to play a role in political coverage and elections coverage, especially in the coming years. Personally, in the US, we've got elections next year in 2024, and I'm already starting to get nervous about it. I'm sure many of you are from countries that recently had elections or will soon, and it will be the same thing there. So as these digital tools get more and more sophisticated, it means that we as journalists have to get better at fact checking, and we have to get better at making sure that the information that we share and circulate is accurate and factual and correct to the best of our ability and knowledge. That can be difficult. I'm sure we're all in 5 million WhatsApp groups. Somebody sends you something, you think it looks interesting, you forward it on to 4 of your other WhatsApp groups, and you don't stop and really think how accurate it is, or, you know, read all the way to the bottom to make sure that there's nothing inflammatory or incorrect. So, you know, it's the journalists, but it's also as citizens, and we're all both of those things at all times. And I think that, you know, as AI continues to mature and gets more and with each generation gets more and more advanced, and whatever the next tool is that's doing something similar, we have to figure out ways that we can use it to our advantage instead of always being taken by surprise by the after effects. And I have started to hear some really interesting conversations from journalists about what they're doing with AI and other kinds of digital tools. And I'm excited to be a part of that process, and, you know, to see a Zoom chat here full of media leaders and future media leaders. You're going to be part of the ones leading the way in your communities for how we deal with the next challenges.
Well, thank you, Aliza, for these for insights. Very quickly, Sanna, what are your reflections on digital surveillance, cyberbullying, and also how the Gambian Press Union is providing assistance to challenge these issues?
Hello. Is that for me? Was that question for me?
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, if you can just share with us, what kind of assistance the Gambian Press Union providing journalists tackling digital surveillance, cyber bullying, and other.
Okay. I think I would say I am not private. I have been very active since my return here. Before I worked for the president's office, I used to work as an independent journalist. 2017, 2018 in May was when I was hired to go and help in the communication aspect of the transition. So I stayed, but 2020 I left because of some reasons. But throughout that time, I have been very active working with the union and also in helping in the pushing for the reforms. Now, I know that the press union have been organizing a lot of trainings, mostly around personal safety, and other things, and also reforms, so I am not aware that they've done any single digital training, cybersecurity training. A lot of journalists have those issues about cyber threats. I'll give an example. My own social media pages were hacked because I used to conduct this interview to talk to people who could have influence, for example, policies and programs of the government and helping in the transition. It was quite a popular program, but then for some reason, my page got hacked, and then it was taken over from me, and I'm not the only one who had been undergoing this, and we've been making this known to the press union. So what the hackers, what they do, because Gambia is 95% Muslim country, what they do is they go and post contents of nude women, on these pages. So it was trying to depopularize those pages, and also it scares away others from going to the page because they think it's very indecent. But this was deliberately done. And then it was like every 2 days or so, they bring a new photo that they are posting there. So a lot of people started scaring them. It took me time before I could recover my page fully. I had to undergo a lot of petitions through Meta's office, and then to go to a review board. And eventually they restored my page. And then it was confirmed that it was definitely a cyber attack from a group of guys. I'm not sure whether it is local or it is international. But I have seen other journalists who have also experienced similar issues, also with their emails, and then without having the right skills or the right to protect themselves. Now, that beside, the state also has there is a policy. Because of the law I said, there is a policy in place that also allows the intelligence body to also do surveillance in the name of national security. And this surveillance is also covering not only journalists, or not only popular citizens, but also journalists are also covered. What they do with this information is like, now they're not arresting journalists for their critical reporting, but most of the political parties, they create their own media platforms because it's online media from Facebook to digital, other forms of digital media. They do their live streaming, they do their thing. So they initiate deliberate campaign to counter credible news that could have exposed their excesses or corruptions or violations, or sometimes some very bad government policies. And then because they have the powers, they've got supporters, they've got the political budget, and they've got money, they become very effective in countering very strong news contents that were credibly produced by journalists. So that's another problem that we have. The third problem that I will say, under the Information and Communications Act, there is no regulation on online media, for example, as opposed to the traditional media. That means every citizen can just get up and then set up a media house online. You don't have to undergo any licensing or anything. Even if you are not registered, because there is no law compelling you to go and register, there is no regulation. And that means that we have more citizen journalists competing with credible sources of news sources as trained journalists. And sometimes they even have more followers, because if they are sensational, they are putting a lot of content there that people are more sensational about, competing against some formal kind of news guidance. So we have those kind of issues that are still going, and we were hoping that some kind of laws will come that will help us to curtail some of these things. But unfortunately, we haven't seen our reform going towards that direction. So it is very slow in that regard. That's what I can remember of it right now.
Thank you so much, Sanna. I think it's a common practice in most autocratic regimes to use digital surveillance or having like policing on social media to use it against journalists and silence the voices of the journalists and the citizens. And thanks so much for sharing all of these. Now I'm giving it back to Cemre, for the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all your responses, and I will just dive into the Q&A session because I see great discussions going on here in the chat too. But I'll twist the line for today as I see a couple very interesting questions. So Anna, if you're available to unmute yourself, maybe open your cam if not opened yet. As the AI was the latest topic of discussion here, let's start with you. Aliza very much covered this, but anything else that you want to add on? I would love to have your reflections too.
Yeah, sure. Hi. So yeah, it was really interesting. Thank you, Aliza, for talking a bit more about AI earlier. So I was just wondering how these digital security issues would affect the safety of journalists. If you could just talk a bit more about that. Thank you so much.
Yes. So how does digital security affect you as a journalist? So there are a couple of different ways. The first is you're communicating externally outside of your media outlet with sources, right? You call them, you text them, they call you, they text you, you email back and forth. So if your communications methods are not secure, then anything is susceptible to hacking. In a lot of countries, it's not so. Sometimes you get kind of very obvious phishing schemes, like an email with a name you don't know that says click on this link, and hopefully most of us have enough sense to know you don't click on a link from an email from a person you don't know. But sometimes the attacks are a lot more sophisticated. Sometimes the email will come from a person you know, because the hackers have managed to spoof an email. So in any event, once they get access to one part of your system, then it's pretty easy to go from there. So you want to be able to protect your sources so you can continue to do your job. But you also need to be able to protect yourself. So if hackers are able to gain access to your system, they can shut your phone and computer and hold it for a ransom, for hostage, basically, so that way you can't access any of your materials. They could post your name, they could post your address and your personal phone number on the internet, which is called doxing, and then other people would be able to show up at your house. Somebody here mentioned that, Cemre, actually, I think, mentioned you had heard from Rana Ayub. Hers is an extreme case, but there are a lot of cases where people's journalists' personal information is posted online, and people who wish them ill show up at their house or call them at all hours of the night and harass them and stalk them. So it is worth taking the extra steps to protect yourself. I see in the chat someone mentioned signing up for Proton. That is a great first start. Google is a lot more secure than it used to be, but if you want really secure email, I do recommend Proton. VPNs are more difficult. a VPN that many journalists specifically use is called Siphon. And that is a VPN that lots of journalists use. So I would recommend that one if you need a safe one, but there are others too. Some are paid, some are free. Just make sure you look into it before you sign up, but that's a good way to kind of protect your digital trail. And then lastly, secure communications. I would make sure, in addition to email, WhatsApp is a good start. Signal is even better if you can. And then additionally, I would make sure that you're not storing your files in only one place. So in case you're storing all of your files on Google Drive, which I think is what most of us probably do, I would also store things separately on a hard drive in another location, so that in the event that your data is compromised or hacked, you still have what you need in another place. And on top of that, don't store any like personal details in public places. There's a really famous video of a journalist who's doing broadcast, who's on air doing an interview, and right over their shoulder you can see a post-it note with all of their passwords written on it. And so while they were talking on TV, people logged into their Twitter account and hacked it because they had just posted the password right there. So don't be that journalist. But in all honesty, there are good resources out there. There are some very basic steps that you can take. And anytime that you're asking yourself, for me, a good marker is if you're ever asking yourself, is this too much? Like, am I going crazy? The answer is no, it's not too much. Do it. Better to do it and feel a little silly than to not do it and regret it later.
And it's usually like, just like you said, small things that will matter in the long run, like losing your password or dealing with this exhaust state of mind that you lost your Twitter, or some other person is there logging into your private information, seeing your conversations, maybe taking screenshots and everything. So it's all these small practical things that we all have to be cautious about living in this digital age. But thank you so much for these practical takeaways. Sanna, any quick reflections from you? Would you like to share anything in this manner? Any strategies of online security?
Yes. I think based on my own experience, I like to, because I also belong to another group that they call Africtivists. That is Pan-African bloggers and web activists for democracy. It also includes some web journalists. During the dictatorship, we have been using the digital media a lot to balance the scale of suppression against journalists. So we use certain tools. The Tor browser, for example, is very good for journalists to also cover their tracks online. I would recommend that for a lot of journalists to use if you are in a country where there is strong digital surveillance. Okay. There are other tools that you can use. Journalists also need to learn how to encrypt their data, be it email or be it, sometimes you can even use USB drives that are encrypted so that you can store your investigative materials. There are times that there are a lot of sparewares that you are also working, you don't even know that you are also being monitored. So you need to also have strong anti-software, antivirus softwares on your tools, on your equipment. For example, on your laptop, you should also have one for your phone, equally on your phone, and make sure there are a lot of other digital tools that we have been using when we are on the dictatorship, and that helps us a lot. Sometimes you will not even want to associate yourself with your certain digital account because you know that deliberately you are being monitored every time. I remember there was a very popular website they call Freedom Newspaper. It was published by one of the exiled journalists in the US. He was a dissident. The state had to hire hackers and pay them very good money to hack into the list, because these guys were exposing a lot of things about the former regime, and they wanted to know who was leaking information to them. So they went to they got the subscription list through this hacking, and then that list was used to crack down on all the subscribers who were in the country here. So a lot of people were taken to prison for that, and they were detained, they were tortured because they have been subscribing to this online media. So you need to also, as a journalist, take all of those things into consideration so that you're not only protecting yourself, but also your sources, because your sources are also giving information because they have trust and confidence in you. So you should do everything in your power to also protect them, not only physically, but also digitally. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I guess the most top 3 takeaways from your response will be data encryption, virus softwares, and backup profiles. Very, very practical steps that we can easily make sure that we are covered on that end. Thank you so much for these. Well, before wrapping up the cybersecurity issues, I think Shadan, many of your questions here is covered, but I would love to have your responses still. Please, if you're available, join us. Are there any tactical things that you've been following and making a difference for you, or any other things that you would like to address? I see that your question, and particularly Aliza, talked about this, but any reflections or anything that you would love to share? Is there an aspect of journalism that is free of harassment? For example, how susceptible are sport journalists to harassment? Interesting. Any reflections?
Well, I think that there are probably some that are more susceptible to harassment than others. I think politics for sure gets the worst of it. Investigative journalists get the worst of it, fact checkers. And then, as I previously mentioned, your chances of being harassed and otherwise bothered are just so much higher if you're a woman or if you're part of the LGBTQ community or another marginalized group. I'm sure that there are some sports journalists out there who are getting harassed less. We work with them probably a bit less at ICFJ, so I don't have any firsthand information. But I would say that no matter what kind of journalism you're doing, you should still take the steps to protect yourself just in case.
Thank you so much. I see Winston's hand up. As I skim through other questions, please unmute yourself.
Yes. Hi, guys. In Zimbabwe, we will be heading for the harmonized election on the 23rd of August. So it's an intimidating environment for the journalists, especially freelancers, those from private media. There is a lot of intimidation and harassment as the main political parties, that is the ruling party, the ZANU-PF, and the opposition. They are now doing their rallies across the country's 10 provinces. So some journalists are denied access to cover the rallies, despite showing their accreditation from the Zimbabwe Media Commission, which is the body that is responsible for accrediting all journalists that operate in Zimbabwe. So sometimes the environment becomes hostile in the sense that those supporters, mainly of the ruling party, perceives journalists from private media and freelancers as opposition people in terms of their operations. So some are stoned, some are beaten up simply because they come from the other side of the media. That is the current environment as Zimbabwe heads towards the harmonized election on August 23.
Thank you so much for your reflections. Again, something that we already discussed, but any additional highlights or takeaways you would love to share?
Probably bearing in mind that there's no story that is worth dying for. It's just a way of trying to be safe as journalists, especially those that operate within the private media. So it becomes an issue of how to give the society the real news in terms of what will be happening within those rallies across the country, whereby the authoritarian government using the state media is its mouthpiece changed to feed the society with the news they deem to be positive within their operations. So it's really a said to the citizen when it comes to getting information, because the packaging is done in an agenda setting way. So yeah, that's the environment faced with journalists, especially freelancers and those working for private media, and the society in terms of getting the real information, what is real happening, especially considering that the foreign observers are actually following the environment and the situation. There is need to give that a real situation on the ground. But sadly, it's not the case simply because the voice of the voiceless sometimes is denied the access to report on the ground. So what is disseminated within the society is from that one side, which is the state media giving the support of the ruling party.
Thank you so much for these important takeaways. And in earlier of your remarks, you touched upon observing elections as well. As far as I could understand, I think your connection was just a little bit weak, but I would love to underline that there are also some independent intergovernmental agencies like Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe does have a board, an international election observatory mission, a board which very closely in person observes elections taking place in different parts of the world, particularly taking a closer look at the ones that elections are taking place where press freedom is washed away or where majority of the media organizations are under government either ownership or pressure. So it's very important that we have these intergovernmental supports on board as well. And moving on, I saw Daisy's question is, what are the benefits of international cooperation in addressing cross-border threats to media freedom and journalist safety? Aliza, your institution is already doing a great job, great work, important work to support journalists in reporting from exile as well. But any takeaways for the importance of global solidarity to combat transnational harassments on journalists?
Well, I think as many people have said, a lot of these issues are transnational anyway. Anything that's happening in the digital space doesn't care about a border. So I think, having a united line internationally is incredibly important to kind of make sure that everybody on the side of truth and democracy and media freedom is presenting a solid front and tackling these issues together. Because, I'll use myself as an example, but if journalists in the US are handling these issues, but not presenting a united front with colleagues in Africa and Asia and Latin America, then when those same issues come to Asia and Latin America, then those journalists won't have the tools and things still slip through the cracks. So the best way is to present a united front. And I think that there are a lot of organizations that like mine that are doing this, but I think that some of the best is journalism networks that are, there are journalists that are working in regional networks or sub-regional networks. So I see a lot of folks here from Africa. There are a lot of really great organizations in Africa. A couple that we work with include, there's an organization called Code for Africa, which does a lot on open source intelligence and disinformation and fact checking. And they support journalists all across the continent. Their offices are in Kenya and South Africa, but they've got staff all over. We work with the Africa Women Journalism Project, which focuses on supporting female journalists across the continent. And that's just in Africa. In the Middle East, we work with Arij, the Arab Reporters Investigative Journalism. I forget the exact acronym, but Arij, it's an Arab network of investigative journalists, again, cross-border, cross-national. In Latin America, we work often with Sembra Media which are based in Argentina, and they have a focus on media entrepreneurship and sustainability, and with Conectas, based in Colombia, and they have a focus on investigative journalism. So, around the world, there are regional networks, and I think that that's a really good place to start. And then, yes, thank you for sharing, Arish. And then basically networks of networks. So you have to start somewhere. So I think it's a great idea to start local, start in your country, start in your region, and then build from there. And that's something that I know that ICFJ tries to do, and other media development organizations as well. So I think, keep sharing this information. And this group right here is a really good example, because if people here start working together, then that covers probably 15, 20 different countries. That's a really great place to start.
Thank you so much. Sanna, anything you want to add on in this regards, importance of solidarity, sharing resources, experiences?
Yes, I think this is quite important, because when we were under dictatorship in the Gambia, we benefited a lot from this international solidarity, from journalism organizations, from journalism associations, and from unions across the world. It is quite important, for example, in the case of Turkish journalists right now, what they are going through. So the other journalists keeping solidarity with them is quite important. It helps them, give them the spirit, and it also gives them hope that one day this is going to change and something better would come. And as a result, they also have to plan for that change. When it comes, what role are they going to play? What do they hope to become probably in the new dispensation that is going to be in their country? So they also have to anticipate that if it is about capacity, they need to build their capacity. You also need to make sure that you have a voice, because for me, in the Gambia, in our case, we refuse to be silenced, because the transition after the change of government, a lot of times it's the politicians who want to dominate the change agenda. You don't want to be a politician, but you also want to make sure that your voice doesn't just get neutralized in the presence of all these other noises that are coming from politicians. Yes, they have political agendas, but the agenda of the media is going to be quite important. As the fourth arm of the state, we need to have the media more vibrant, more strengthened in a democratic situation, in a democratic culture. And sometimes, if it is necessary, you can even have technical support from other organizations that could be with you to guide you to in the transition, and that is going to happen. So I know it is going to be tough, but I'm just going to ask them to be patient and then plan for a day when they will celebrate freedom on a totally different kind of environment that is going to be more democratic than what they have right now in Turkey. So, and also to all the other countries, for example, my colleagues in Zimbabwe, I know it has been tough with them too, and also in Egypt, so we will also continue to speak up for them. You have to maintain the networking. Sometimes you reach out to some of us so we can also speak up for you. We can also be able to share experiences on how these things are happening and how they are done. So that's what I wanted to add to it. And I hope that this fight goes on for press freedom. The voice of the people cannot die. It is only alive because of us. So we must never give up on this fight. Thank you very much. And thank you all for giving me the opportunity to come and share my experience.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sanna, for these wonderful wrap-up remarks. And Aliza, thank you for your presence today. We had a wonderful discussion. Hosting both of you was a privilege for us as a part of the Media and Journalism webinars. We spoke on the ways to combat various forms of state-led harassment, violence within the society, the rising threat of disinformation, misinformation, threats on online platforms, social media platforms, shared practical tactics on how to protect ourselves, physical, mental well-being, to set barriers, not to be influenced all by these rising tech challenges, barriers. And very importantly, Aliza's reminder was very important for me, not to be cautious in our reporting and set our boundaries so we don't fall into the trap of secondary trauma. This is something that human rights defenders and journalists do combat quite frequently in our daily lives too. So we have to train ourselves in that regards as well. So turning to Aliza, any last goodbyes? I would love to have your last remarks, and then we're gonna wrap today's session.
No, just thank you all very much for being here. Thank you for your excellent questions and comments. I've really enjoyed hearing from you, and I hope that I'll get the chance to work with many of you in the future. I think someone earlier shared my Twitter account. Feel free to reach out to me on any, and if you look me up, my email is listed on the ICFJ website. So please feel free to reach out and stay in touch. I hope that we'll see you one day at an ICFJ program or event, or here at another JWF event or program. And seeing a group of promising young journalists makes me feel great about the future. So keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. I guess Sanna is now off of the session, so I'll just turn to Mehmet for his last remarks.
Thank you so much. I just would like to echo what Winston said, I think, which is an important point. And he mentioned about the right of access to election events. And sometimes the governments are using accreditation of journalists in elections. And sometimes they are canceling press cards of journalists, and this is a way to obstruct press freedom. I think that was an important point. Thank you for sharing that from Zimbabwe. And thank you so much, Aliza. Thank you, Sanna, and thank you everyone for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you on the 5th session on Tuesday. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. See you everyone next Tuesday for the last session. Greetings. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Bianca.
Bye.